So as Nick said, my name's Chris. I'm from Support, and I just want to talk to you about a bit of background first of who we are and what we've been doing, and also an experiment that we've recently run and the results of that experiment and where we're taking it next and where I think you guys should take it as well. So the background, why am I here today? What was this that we want to talk about? Basically, a long story short, some time ago the Greenhopper team started telling us and teaching us about Kanban. And this got us really excited in Support. And so we started to read up on it, started to learn a bit more about it, and figured this is the kind of thing that we want to use in Support. So who are we in Support? We are a group of, we used to be 70 people this time last year. Now we're 100 plus staff. We're growing. We expect to hopefully be at about 150 next year. But we're spread out over 5 locations. We provide 24/7 availability for Atlassian Support. So that means you can contact us as customers anytime of the day or week, day or night. Doesn't matter when you want to get a hold of us, we'll be available. We were tracking about 1,000 issues a week this time last year. Now we're currently tracking about 1,500. So our issue creation is growing. The number of issues that we're taking and handling is definitely growing. And this is partially because we provide support with every product, but also because our licenses have just been going through the roof. We're selling more and more these days. So the problem that you can see there already is that we're now growing faster in terms of issue creation than we are in terms of staff to handle those issues. So the problem is one of scale. We're not able to scale fast enough. And scaling is quite a difficult thing to do when you also want to maintain your quality. We actually refer to ourselves as legendary support. We say our support is legendary, and we'd like to live up to that name. And if there is anyone here that has used support, just put up your hand. Excellent. And for those of you that thought the service was legendary, just leave your hand up. Everyone else can put their hand down. That's good to see. I wish there were a few more hands up, but that's okay. Basically, we want to make sure that we're improving what we do so that we can scale so that tomorrow we can handle just as many issues or twice as many issues or 3 times as many issues, but still have the same, if not better quality with each of those issues. And I'm not talking about the actual individual tickets we face, but also the ongoing way that we develop support and make sure that we're providing the best stuff for tomorrow. And to top this all off, anytime we want to make a change or introduce something new, we don't have a hard stop that we can do it during. So we are actually a 24/7 group. That means we don't have any time where we can get everyone together. We're in 5 different locations, so it is impossible to get everyone together. And we need to make sure that anything we do seamlessly integrates with the rest of our system and doesn't interrupt any other processes. On top of this, the scaling problem can become an issue in terms of employee morale and just the engineers themselves that are handling those tickets. Recently, we're getting more and more siloed, where we're having people individually working on their queues rather than working as a team. They're getting more stressed with the workload that they're handling alone rather than sharing it as a team. On top of that, the issues just keep on coming. In support, it's quite a stressful environment. We have this very strange mix of very technical skills that we use to solve the problems and handle the issues at the same time as this very sort of intangible kind of customer service skill set that we need to have to keep everyone happy and bright and bubbly. On top of that, we're getting more and more interruptions every day. With the introduction of Jira Enterprise Support, we've now got phone support for even non-critical issues. So we're potentially looking at facing interruptions from IM, from escalations, from critical issues, and also from the phones as well. So we want to make sure that whatever we do is going to improve life for the support engineers so that they're not siloed, they're not working by themselves. They're less stressed because that's the worst thing that we want to do to them, and that they can actually focus on the customers that they have at hand. So we ran an experiment, and the experiment was because the Greenhopper team had been teaching us about Kanban, as I'd said. And they just finished putting the finishing touches on the rapid board when they started teaching us a little bit more, and we started getting the idea for this experiment. But the rapid board was very different for us because from day one we actually got introduced to each new feature as it arrived. We went to weekly demos with the Greenhopper team, and they told us the use case for the different features, but also the philosophy behind that use case. And this really told us about Agile for the first time. and support really got to know what it all meant. So this was great for us, and this really meant that we could actually understand what was going on, and really it inspired us to try and adapt that to our own system. So we looked into it. We found out that we wanted to run this experiment. We decided that we would run it within one small team. That team is going to be the Jira support team within Kuala Lumpur. Now this team, we chose this team specifically because A, availability, B, we had people that were interested in the experiment, but C, most importantly, their stats were not the greatest, they weren't the worst, they were the mid-range stats. This team was basically our mid-range team, and this was fantastic. We wanted that team to be representative of what we were doing. So we chose them, and we chose to actually run this trial during the launch of Jira 5 and Greenhopper 5.9. The reason we chose to do that is because if we run an experiment in support, we want to make sure that it lasts through even the launch of a new product. If it doesn't last during the launch of a new product, then we are going to be in trouble. We have approximately 13 different products that we provide support for, which means we're doing launch weeks every other week. All right, so then what we had to do from here, we knew what the experiment was, we knew when it was going to happen and where it was going to happen, so we started putting it together. So step one from every book that we'd read and every piece of information we'd read about Kanban was to visualize the workflow. So we started by doing that. We had a look at what we would traditionally consider our workflow. And that kind of looked like this, just these two columns, unassigned issues and everything else. If an issue was unassigned, it would need somebody to look at it, need some attention on it, and need someone to start working on that. Once it got assigned, once it left the unassigned pool, once it went to waiting for customer, it was in the everything else pile. But then when we spoke to the individual engineers, they sort of thought of it similar but with an extra column in there. And that was their issues. So then there was basically a situation where an issue would be unassigned, then it would move to my personal queue, and then from there it would go into the everything else pile. Now this is a very narrow mindset, and it's unfortunately what was leading to a lot of that siloed nature. Once we looked at it properly and figured out exactly what was going on, we found that there are a lot more statuses. So we're looking at now 6 different statuses that an issue could be in throughout the life cycle. Now from here an issue could of course move from the original creation where it's unassigned, goes into my queue. Once it's in my queue, I send a response out to the customer and say, hey, does this work? Try this. They can come back to me and say, no, it didn't, and then I can try again. If they're not happy with the responses that I've given, then they can escalate the issue and either get someone else to look at it or just get a little bit more attention on it. If I'm struggling with the case myself, if I don't know the answers and I need to get one of our developers to give us some input on it, then I can actually escalate the issue myself as well. Once we have a solution and once the customers confirm that solution, they can actually tell us it's resolved, and from it finally hits the resolved pile. And then when an issue is resolved, we actually go through, we do a little post-mortem on it, we wrap it up and we move it to the done column. So this is a far more complicated workflow than we had ever really properly visualized and really thought about. And this was really teaching us a lot more about what was going on in support. What was even more worrying though is when we actually started figuring out how many issues were in each status at any one time. We figured that originally we were just watching the unassigned queue and also our own personal issues, which was making up around about 22% of our workload. Once we looked at what was happening in waiting for customer, we found that 2/3 of our issues were sitting there at any one time. And this was frightening, mainly because the waiting for customer column is a section where those issues could come back in any one of 3 different ways. They could come back as more work to be done, they could come back as more work to be done urgently, or they could come back as a resolved issue. So there's essentially at that point, there's a 2 in 3 chance that we have to do more work, and there's a 1 in 3 chance that this is resolved. So if we've got all our issues there and we don't know what the next step is for them, it's quite a sort of an unbalanced sort of a tricky thing to predict with. So when we were looking at this, we started thinking, right, let's have a look at where all our issues lie and what do we do next. So we thought, how can we actually predict what is happening with waiting for customer? We actually started to go back to our stats guys and we said, what happens? What do the reports tell us? What do our existing reports tell us about this one? we found that 33% of these issues return from that waiting for customer status back to Atlassian investigating in that My Issues column, and they'll come back 33% of them within 24 hours. So by the end of today, we'll have had a third of those come back. Now, this helped us immensely. This meant that we now have, I guess, 40% of our issues we do have to keep an eye out for that we weren't even looking at before. More importantly, if you look at the original 2 columns, we were only looking at 3% of our workflow. And now we actually know where all the issues lie. So visualizing it just helped us immensely straight away figure out where everything was. Then we started using some of the charting features that the Rapid Board brought us. This chart here is actually the control chart for Jira, for the Jira project, sorry. So anytime a customer has raised a Jira support ticket, its stats end up on here. Now this is covering a few months from December through to March, and we can actually see here, for example, first up we've got this sort of diagonal line that's going through there. And that's because people don't resolve or create anywhere near as many issues on Saturday and Sunday. And we get this gap in the middle that's representing that weekend there where stuff isn't being done. Secondly, we've got this wonderful gap here that we can see that is showing us New Year's. The New Year's holiday where not many people came on board and not many people were raising issues, not many people were closing issues. We've also got the Monday to Friday sort of columns that we're getting here, showing us sort of how many people are actually raising and resolving, again, issues Monday to Friday versus a Saturday to Sunday. And finally, we can also see this wonderful line across the middle there that shows us the 7-day timeout. A bit of background behind that is that we have a little robot that runs, and every 5 days, if an issue has not been updated, if an issue has not been updated for 5 days, then we will actually go in and ask the customer if there's anything more that we need or that they need, and if it is actually resolved. If we don't hear anything back, 2 days later, we will actually close it. And so we can see this script here has got this wonderful line at the 7-day mark that is showing us exactly what's going on. So a little bit more background about this chart is that we've got on the y-axis, we've got days, so number of days to actually get an issue resolved. And on the x-axis, we've just got the dates going through time. So if an issue is resolved, what will happen is it will appear on the day that it's resolved, and the y-axis will say how many days it took to resolve it. So for example, these issues are saying, and on average, it's about 10 days to resolve a case. So once we've actually looked at all this stuff, we've visualized it, we now know what's going on, and we've even got reports that show us this stuff that we had anecdotal feelings about but never had any true empirical evidence. We can now start identifying waste. So we wanted to have a look at one important factor that the Agile groups and that Greenhopper team kept telling us about, and that was the team, the actual team versus an individual. So we used to work very much as individuals. We'd go through this process that would involve looking at an issue when we wanted to pick one up and sort of doing this miniature triage process in our head. We'd look at it, maybe download the logs, scan through it, try and figure it out. Once we've got an idea of where this issue is going to go, we'll actually see if we are the one to solve it or if someone else will do it better. So I may be the Greenhopper guru, but maybe I want to give Michael some experience with Greenhopper. So maybe he's better suited to take this particular issue. Or maybe he's not suited to take it because it's too advanced. Maybe I'd be the best one to take it, but I don't have enough bandwidth right now. Are we going to be able to respond to it in time? Each of our issues have an SLA on it, ranging from 1 to 24 hours. So if we are not going to be able to respond to it in time if I don't take it, then I should probably pick it up now and respond to it immediately so that we can get that in time. This is a very complicated process, and we used to go through this with every single ticket that we'd pick up. And since engineers, it would be up to the engineers themselves to watch the queue and pick up tickets from the queue, this would happen with everything that we pick up. Now, if we're working towards our sort of magic number of about 5 to 6 issues per day, we'd be looking at about 7 to 8 issues per day. So that's on average about 2 issues that we're looking at and not picking up. This is hugely wasteful. This was crazy waste for us, because if we were to look at 1 issue or 2 issues per day, totaling 5 to 10 minutes, then we could end up wasting over 11 man hours per day, basically 1.5 staff members. This is a very quick way to actually lose a lot of focus as well, because it means we have to keep going back to that queue. But most importantly, we're losing essentially 2.5 staff members a day just to that triage process. So now we've identified where the waste is, we want to see how we can remove it. And removing it was a big thing for us, because if we can get those 2.5 men back, then that's going to be great. Sorry, 1.5 guys back, that's going to be great. So once we've looked at where the problem is, we wanted to come up with a new plan. Our old plan meant that we had people triaging the queue. The new plan was to have a single dispatcher. And the dispatcher was going to sit there and they were going to triage all the new issues that come through, triage every single new critical issue, and monitor for escalations. When a new issue comes through that needs immediate attention, they will find the right person to get attention on that ticket and assign it to them. So this meant that the dispatchers were now actually actively assigning every issue that came through in the queue to other people, rather than people going in and picking their own issues. On top of that, we had we set up our rapid board to allow the dispatcher to see the capacity of every single engineer, so they would know who's got the lightest load and who's got the heaviest load, and who can actually start taking issues straight away. This meant that the engineers themselves had a lot less to focus on now. They could just focus on their issues. That's all they would have to do, just look at their queue only. When a new one came along, they would get an IM, they would get a tap on the shoulder, they'd be told, here's an escalation for you, or here's a level 1 for you, please take that one. Otherwise, they just keep focusing on their own issues. The way we use the dispatcher, the way we picked the dispatcher rather, was by taking usually our senior support engineers, the guys who know a little bit more about the rest of the team, know the strengths and weaknesses of the people in the team, but also know how to quickly, I guess, analyze and diagnose issues or triage issues. We'd often have it rotating, but we'd try and keep one dispatcher as the dispatcher role for as long as possible. On top of this, we started looking at the next part of the problem, is that the dispatcher's taking care of all the criticals and escalations, but they're not actually handling any of the non-critical issues. They're still getting triaged, but they're not actually getting assigned out. So the way we wanted to do this is to stop having a little bit of waste here as well. So we started running these Wallboard stand-ups, they called them in the team. Basically, everyone crowds around the dispatcher's computer, and we all sit down and all stand around and have a look at what issues are in the queue right now. Now, because we've usually left the non-critical ones for a little bit of time, they've got 8 to 24 hours for us to respond to them, so we have that sort of leeway. We've now got more than a few. We've actually got enough to start bulking them into types of issues. So the dispatcher will go through and read out essentially like a headline description of the problem. We've got an LDAP configuration issue here, we've got a plugin install problem here, and people will then stick up their hand to take on that issue. So for example, I might figure I'm already working on an LDAP issue. If an LDAP one is called out, then I'll try and grab that one as well. It'll save me time, I won't have to set up another environment, I've already got one going, so that'll be great. The other thing that we were doing is the dispatcher would know what other issues are in that queue. So if there were already 3 LDAP issues all about the same kind of problem, we can just send them to the same person. This helps us immensely by having not just the one guy handling all the right issues, but more importantly, we want to have 3 sets of logs, 3 different customer instances that we can compare notes between and find the patterns and find the differences. This way we can actually solve problems faster by having 3 times as much information about new bugs, new quirks, new issues. And at the very least, if they're all 3 different issues, we at least have the same sort of platforms to test within. If I set up an LDAP server and then have to move over to a plugin installation issue, then I'm probably not going to have to use that LDAP server again for a while. So if I can just use that for 3 issues at once, rather than having 3 people separately wasting their time setting up those LDAP servers, it's going to save us a lot of time. It also helped reduce context switching. It meant that when I do look at an issue, I know that it's going to be similar to the one that I just looked at and the one that I will look at after this as well. Basically, it means I'm not jumping around from one thought to the next. I can just focus on a very particular kind of topic for a while. In addition to this, as I mentioned before, we were using the rapid board to have a look at the reports, have a look at the statuses, but also to figure out who has what issues, who has assigned, how many issues assigned to them, what issues need to be assigned, and what we need to look at next. So we use Greenhopper to do this. The reason we used it, and the reason it was a huge thing for us, is because once we installed it, we didn't have any further downtime to make any changes. With the Rapid Board, you can set up a Rapid Board, create a new one, copy an existing one, modify it, delete it, whatever you want to do. You can change it around and really quickly prototype and configure your changes and your Rapid Board there without having a restart. Now, traditionally on support.atlassian.com, if we wanted to make some serious changes or changes to functionality, then it would require a restart. And restarts for us are very tricky because we want to have 24/7 availability, which means that we generally schedule the restarts for the weekend. And then because we're a global team, the weekend ends on Friday in San Francisco and begins on Monday in Sydney, which means we actually only get 1 day per week to do a restart. So if we schedule a change, we want to make something happen, we make that change happen over the weekend, and we come in Monday and we find it's not quite what we want, we have to wait a whole week before we get another chance. So with the Rapid Board, on the other hand, just being able to do this stuff on the fly, no restarts required, was fantastic. It really helped us get this going. So we went from our old Wallboard that looks like this. I've removed the descriptions from these issues to protect the innocent, but this is how it would look. It was just a list of unassigned issues or critical issues that needed attention. And we would go from that kind of view to this. So this is our Rapid Board. We can see right now what we've done is we've elevated using a swim lane all the unassigned issues to the top. So we know that these need to be looked at sooner than the rest. They need some attention especially from the dispatcher. And then what we've done is we've folded up all the other swim lanes. So each swim lane is actually an assignee. We've got Momo and Daniel up there, and we can see that they've got a few issues already assigned to them. So that is the total number of issues they've got assigned, whether it's waiting for them or waiting for the customer, or regardless of what status it's in, as long as it's still an active issue, it will be counted towards that. And as we found out, we should be looking at much, much more than just the issues that are currently waiting for us. So if we've got a third of our work or 65% of our work waiting for customer, then we should still be looking at those issues as well. Now this gives the dispatcher an idea of what workload they have now, but also what workload they're going to have by the end of the day and by tomorrow morning. So this is a much more important number for us than what we were previously dealing with. So from here we can actually very quickly look at the data we want to find. We can cut information up. We can use quick filters to quickly identify level 1s and level 2s. We could use quick filters to find long-running cases. Basically, it lets us quickly drive down to the information that we need and still get the big picture, which is very important. So that was the experiment that we ran. Now, we ran it for a month. We ran it for the month that Jira 5 launched, and we want to know how that went. So that went sort of like this. We first of all had to define how we measure success within support. The measurements we use for success are two main metrics. Number one is response time, and that is measured as a percentage of the issues that are responded to within their designated SLA. So that we want this to be, it's a percentage, we want it to be higher to be better. We normally run at around about 90-odd%, so we wanted to basically make sure that either is maintained or improved. And our escalation rate. So the escalation rate we also want to look at, because if we have a high escalation rate, it means we don't understand what is happening with some of our issues. It means we need to learn more about the products that we're supporting. So we want this to be lower, as low as possible. Now, why are we not using customer satisfaction? Being support, that should be our primary metric. And it is our primary metric for most of the things we do, but we simply don't use it for experiments. The reason being the sample size is so much smaller. It's very difficult to get a large quantity of data from customer satisfaction, simply because it relies on certain people being picked for the CSAT survey. On top of that, it relies on certain people responding to the CSAT survey. The response, again, can take some time. If there's a month delay in responding to that, it can mean a month delay in getting our results. We also don't know how many of them have timed out legitimately and how many are intending to get around to it. So it's basically not suitable for measuring experiments, but we did find there's a direct correlation between response time and escalation rate. And by putting those two together, we can sort of abstract and guess what the customer satisfaction will eventually be. But more importantly, we can measure those two instantly rather than customer satisfaction. So how did it actually go? Well, our response time improved dramatically. So keep in mind that this was during the Jira 5.0 and Greenhopper 5.9 launch. So this was a very busy time for us. Pre-trial, the team that was in the trial team remained in the exact same sort of stat ranges as the global team that wasn't in the trial. This is why we chose them. They were pretty much on par with the rest of the averages. Week 1, they improved dramatically. They went up about 3% in terms of their response time, from 92 to about 95. So this helped us get better results for customers faster. We were able to actually get an answer to them much sooner than before, which is a fantastic thing to help them with. Meanwhile, the non-trial teams actually dropped. And the reason they dropped is new products mean difficult issues, new technologies, and usually more issues as well. So with that drop, we did experience, we sort of were expecting it a little bit, but of course we don't really like to have any kind of a drop. But that was with the non-trial team. And this did continue as it got busier and busier with the Jira 5.0 and Greenhopper 5.9 launch. We did even have a dip with the trial team, but they maintained at least their bare minimum and did excel to reach quite some good stats at the end. As for escalations, the trial team halved their escalations. This was phenomenal for us because if you can halve escalations, that means that we know the product so much better than ever before. It means that we don't have to spend 24 hours waiting for the developers in Sydney to get back to us to give us some more information. It means that we don't have to rely on that extra person to give us some info. We can just tell them straight away. The reason that this dropped so dramatically was because of that bulk assigning of issues. Now, during the Wallboard stand-up, we'd actually be able to say, here's 3 LDAP issues. And as I was saying before, we've got 3 sets of logs. We've got 3 instances that we can compare. We can see what's different, what's the same, find patterns, and basically solve these problems faster. It also means that you don't have 3 different engineers trying to solve the same problem in their little silos. You have 1 engineer trying to solve 3 problems all at once. And if we do need to escalate, it's only 1 escalation rather than 3. So that was a fantastic result. And it's a bit difficult to see on this chart, but the non-trial teams had a minor increase in their escalation rate during the same period. This was, again, expected. New products, new technologies, new features, new bugs. So, but we were very happy with that drop. That definitely saved us a lot of time in Sydney. So beyond that, there was a few anecdotal results. The engineers themselves were feeling more in control of the queue. They felt for the first time in a long time that they were in charge of the queue rather than the queue being in charge of them. It was a lot less stressful. Part of this was because we did feel like a team. We were actually working together to make sure that this was done, so it didn't feel quite as hopeless when you're faced with a never-ending queue. And the high energy in the room and just in the team in general after a Wallboard stand-up was fantastic. It just really motivated us to get working together and solving these issues. And it was great as well. If somebody did assign out an issue and I knew how to answer that, or I knew the next step to look for a helpful knowledge-based article, I could actually just send it that way, send it that person's way, when normally I wouldn't even know that they've had that issue assigned. But more importantly, my favorite anecdotal result from this was the fact that there was no impact on the non-trial teams. So the non-trial teams were not changed by this experiment at all, to the extent that when I went back to Sydney and told my mates in Sydney, hey, guess what, I get to go to Summit and talk about this experiment we did, they looked at me and said, what experiment? They had no idea that we were even running this, they had no idea that it was going on, and that's perfect. There was no negative impact, there was no change to what they did. It even means the process that we set up, if we were to roll it out globally, an individual engineer could opt out without negatively impacting anyone else. So beyond that, we actually improved all our stats. We did better, we scaled, but we handled more issues. So during the Jira 5.0 and Greenhopper 5.9 release, we actually had around about a 10% increase in the number of issues being handled during that month. And this was a big increase for us. That would normally mean we need to handle, hire another 7 or 8 people. But instead of that, we were actually able to improve results in the trial team. and this is fantastic. So where are we going from here? Well, we are planning to from here, currently actually, sorry, now it's a standard process. It's a standard process not just for one team in the KL office, but also a second one in the Amsterdam office. So now it's what they do day in, day out. It's no longer just an experiment, it's the norm, the default. We're rolling it out globally, and we're doing it on a team-by-team basis as those teams get excited by it. We're not going to force it onto anyone, and this is, I feel, something that is quite important, because forcing a new process onto people can often lead to the failure of that process. But we are grabbing people who are interested, and we're getting them involved with it, and making sure that they enjoy it and can take it on and improve their stats with it. We're trialing work in progress limits, and this is something that we're still in trial both on a per engineer basis, but also on a global basis. And we don't have any sort of conclusive stuff from that just yet, but we're still looking into it. And the next experiment we're also doing is we're reducing the timeout length. So I showed you that chart before, which had our 7-day line there, where everything was timing out. Well, now we're going to try and reduce that to 24 hours, even as low as 24 hours. We don't know what the final, the magic number will be. We have to experiment, and we're not doing it for everyone. We're doing some trial groups, some non-trial groups, but we want to find out what the best number is in terms of customer engagement, customer satisfaction, and how we can get that resolution rate or resolution time down as low as possible. So where do you guys start? Where can you guys start doing this right now? So my tips to get this done is, number one, visualize your workflow. Visualize everything you do. So if you're already running Jira, grab Greenhopper. If you haven't already got it installed, install it. Create a rapid board. The rapid board's available in Greenhopper 5.8 onwards. But if you create a new rapid board, it is dead simple. All you do is you give it a name and you select the projects that you want to add to that rapid board, and you're done. If you already have a filter that shows you the issues that you want to look at, use that filter. Keep in mind though, if you're filtering out waiting for customer style things, you might not see those. You probably want to make sure you've got the right filter for that. So once you've got this done, you can now visualize the work you've actually got going. You want to set it out, make sure you map your workflow statuses to the various columns that are available, create new columns if necessary, and start looking at making some maybe swim lanes or quick filters to chop that data up and maybe make it into bite-sized pieces rather than this big, enormous piece of data. So now we've got it visualized, we can see everything there. You want to start identifying waste. Where are all your issues sitting? Where are they sitting for the longest? Greenhopper Rapid Board has got this wonderful time in status dialog on it, so it'll have a bunch of dots across the bottom of the ticket to tell you how long it's been there. If it's got lots of dots, or if they're ending in a red dot, you're in trouble. Look at that issue. Find out why it's been there so long. What is causing that? Find out where the biggest time vampires are. Find out if you have any overlaps. If you have multiple people doing the same job, then you maybe need to do what we did with the dispatcher. Find a way to pull that job into one little spot. Make sure you're working as a team, not an individual. You can have the team specializing, you can have the team all doing the same role, as long as there isn't sort of an overlap and there isn't a group of individuals all just doing the exact same thing. Finally, you want to remove the waste. If you're in support like I am, then you want to use something like a dispatcher. This has been a fantastic way for us to quickly not only triage, but also get a proper strategic control of our queue and really start identifying where the work is and how the work can be done. If you bulk the issues by type, this is fantastic. Again, this was really helpful for us. This really improved our escalation rate. It really improved the knowledge that we were able to pass on to the developers about new issues, new bugs, and just information in general. And you want to look at the reality of the work that you're facing. So this may involve relearning the work that you do, but you want to go back down to the grassroots level and make sure that you understand every step of the process and make sure that everything is there, because we all understand what we do, but sometimes we quite easily forget or ignore certain parts of that. And it's very easy to ignore it and just keep doing the same thing over and over again, but we found that once you get a proper look at it all, you can really have a good idea of where to make those changes. So in summary, our experiment was we wanted to scale support and we wanted to improve or maintain quality. So we managed to scale our capacity by 10%. We managed to improve our quality by increasing the IRT, the response rate, and also decreasing the escalation rate. And most importantly, there was no negative impact to the non-trial teams. So that's what I've got for you today. Thank you very much for your time. If you want to have a chat, I'll be out in the decompression room after this. Otherwise, you can catch me on Twitter or on email. Yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody.